My name is Lila Murphy, and I'm 33. For as long as I can remember, I've believed life rewards those who quietly shoulder burdens no one else wants to touch, those who fix the cracks nobody sees while the world keeps spinning, oblivious. My apartment in San Diego was small, pristine, almost sterile, much like me, organized, functional, invisible to anyone who didn't look closely. I work at a modest library downtown, nothing glamorous. I shelve books, catalog, and run story hours for children on weekends. There's comfort in order, the quiet tick of a scanner, books stacked neatly, pages turned without complaint. Outside these walls, chaos reigns, and I've always felt like the one expected to contain it. I'm in love with Edward, a patient, steady man who somehow balances kindness with quiet humor. Together, we have our daughter, Clara, 9 years old, with curious eyes and a careful spirit. My heart often aches watching her navigate a world that doesn't always value gentleness, a reflection of what I learned too young. My family, well, they are loud, demanding, and unforgiving. My mother, Margaret, has always favored my younger sister, Carly, while I floated somewhere in the background, expected to be useful, unnoticed, silently compliant. Holidays are a stage, and I've always played my part, the responsible one, the invisible one, the one who keeps things running while others bask in attention. That Christmas Eve, the house was packed. 22 people, neighbors, cousins, friends who arrived uninvited because Margaret's door was always open. Clara clung to my hand, eyes wide in the overstuffed living room, the smell of pine and cinnamon mixing with the chaos. Edward stood beside me, calm, aware that something was brewing even before it began. Margaret, in full command mode, spotted Clara and reached for a mop, not a clean one. Gray strings, frayed and dripping. She pressed it into my daughter's small hands. "You eat for free, so start cleaning," she said, smirk sharp as a blade. Time froze. Clara stared at the mop as if it might bite. Her little fingers curled around the handle. Across the room, my cousin Kayla sneered. "Exactly what you deserve, Clara." I wanted to scream, to collapse into fury, but the world had taught me that outbursts were dangerous. I caught Edward's eye. His expression mirrored my horror. Did that just happen? Margaret clipped. "If you're going to keep coming here without paying for groceries, you can contribute. That's how family works." The words fell on me like metal. I felt a cold, sharp click inside me, the kind that doesn't erupt in shouting, but changes everything. I told Clara to sit with Edward, to leave the mop behind. I breathed in the mingled scents of cinnamon, pine, and bleach, and I realized I had had enough. Later, after the forced smiles, the fake hugs, and the silent ride home, Edward and I packed a small suitcase. Clara brought her favorite stuffed fox. The zipper sounded like a decision being made, irrevocable. We slipped into a quiet hotel on the edge of town. Clara slept between us, small and trusting. I stared at the ceiling and thought about a lifetime of invisible service. All those years, I had learned to swallow. When faucets leaked, I tightened them. When bills were forgotten, I paid them. When holidays loomed, I organized, drove, cleaned, and smiled. My sister Carly, meanwhile, basked in attention and praise. Loud, charming, seemingly effortless. People said she lit up a room. Mostly, she lit up my mother's face. The mop incident crystallized it. My endurance had limits, and Clara would not be the next sacrificial lamb. I opened my phone and stared at the Ledger app, a quiet rebellion I had cultivated over years. Not numbers, not totals, just dates, patterns, proof. Patterns of expectation, manipulation, and entitlement I had tolerated for too long. As I watched Clara's chest rise and fall in sleep, I made a vow. I would not teach her that humiliation is love. I would not let my mother decide the price of her dignity. And for the first time, I began to think about what it might feel like to refuse, calmly, resolutely, with no apologies. Outside, the San Diego air was crisp. The lights in the hotel lobby flickered, and I felt a strange, new calm. A life spent doing what was expected had led to this moment, a moment of choice, and I chose. Morning light filtered through the thin hotel curtains, cutting stripes of gold across the bed where Clara slept, still clutching her stuffed fox. I sipped lukewarm coffee, letting the quiet wrap around me. Edward sat across from me, silent but present. He didn't need to speak. I knew he shared the same unspoken question. How did it come to this? I thought back to my childhood, a long string of invisible chores, whispered criticisms, and the endless balancing act of keeping the family machine running. My mother, Margaret, had always measured love in tasks completed and debts repaid. I was the responsible one, the invisible daughter who remembered everyone's birthdays, managed the bills, and never asked for applause. Carly, my younger sister, got the praise, the attention, the freedom to shine without consequence. Even small victories were laden with expectation. A birthday gift wasn't a celebration. It was a debt. A holiday meal wasn't a moment of joy. It was a test of endurance. I had cataloged it all in my head for years, but after Clara's humiliation the night before, I started writing it down. Every dollar, every chore, every favor that wasn't really voluntary. The ledger became a map of invisible abuse. I flipped open my laptop and typed, library fund, $300, Christmas decorations, $75, mom's phone plan add-on, $48, Carly's birthday party, $200. Each line felt like a small act of reclaiming control. I wasn't trying to shame anyone. I was just recognizing the truth. Boundaries had never existed in my family, except on paper, in my mind, where I silently obeyed. Edward leaned over my shoulder, reading. You don't have to do this, he said softly. I do, I murmured. It's the only way I can see clearly. Everything's always been numbers and chores with them. Someone has to keep score so we don't lose ourselves. He nodded. Just be careful. You don't want to start a war you can't finish. I let the words settle. The truth was, this wasn't war. It was a reckoning, a pattern I had tolerated for decades. Unpaid emotional labor disguised as family duty had reached a crescendo. I refused to let Clara become the next victim. I remembered how this pattern had crept into our adult life in small, almost invisible ways. A family potluck that required us to provide the turkey. A birthday brunch for Carly that I funded entirely. The temporary addition of my mother and sister to our phone plan, which somehow lasted 48 months. Small humiliations stacked like bricks until the weight was impossible to ignore. The ledger became more than numbers. It became a narrative. Each expense was a line in the story of compliance and control, every charge a reminder of boundaries I had never enforced. I realized how deeply my mother had conditioned me to feel that my worth was proportional to my usefulness. Clara stirred and blinked up at me with those big, questioning eyes. Mommy, did I do something wrong last night? I shook my head and pulled her close. No, baby, you did nothing wrong. You're not in trouble. That was them, not us. And we don't let people treat us that way. She hugged me tightly, and I felt a surge of resolve. My daughter would learn that dignity isn't a currency to be spent. Humiliation would not be normalized. Throughout that day, I went over the ledger, line by line. I wasn't counting money. I was mapping a history of respect, or the lack thereof. Holidays covered, bills absorbed, chores performed. The totals didn't matter. What mattered was clarity, and clarity was intoxicating. Edward watched me carefully, sensing my growing resolve. When are you going to tell them, Shanaishim? He asked. I don't know yet, I said honestly. I need to be sure, calm, certain. I've spent a lifetime reacting. Now I want to act with purpose. We spent the afternoon in quiet planning, small domestic rituals, making lunch for Clara, straightening the small hotel room, folding laundry. It felt almost revolutionary to engage in ordinary tasks on our own terms, without guilt or obligation. By evening, a subtle tension had settled over me. Not anxiety, exactly, but a simmering anticipation. I knew the confrontation with my family was inevitable. The mop incident had lit a fuse, and I would no longer allow my mother to dictate the rules. As Clara slept again, I opened the ledger and typed one more note. Tomorrow we begin our boundaries. Not revenge, not punishment. Clarity, protection, peace. I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. I was stepping into a new role, one I hadn't occupied before. Protector, advocate, arbitrator of my own family's dignity. Outside, the city hummed and flickered in winter light. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn blared. A dog barked. The hotel heater rattled like a heartbeat. I realized for the first time in my life that choosing to protect yourself and those you love isn't selfish. It's necessary. And so I prepared, silently, meticulously, knowing that the next step would define not just this Christmas, but every moment my daughter remembered as the price of respect. The next morning, the frost on the hotel windows glittered like tiny stars. Clara was curled under a blanket on the sofa bed, still half asleep, murmuring numbers from a math exercise I hadn't even assigned. I brewed coffee strong enough to feel like armor and opened the Ledger app again. Each line of expenses, each unpaid favor, stared back at me like a roadmap of manipulation. It had begun innocuously enough years ago. Margaret had asked, "Could you add us to your phone plan just for a month?" I had agreed, always agreeable, always too eager to avoid conflict. That month turned into years, creeping quietly like ivy over a wall. Lines for Carly, Kayla, international charges, streaming services. Suddenly, our modest budget had been hijacked by entitlement disguised as necessity. Edward watched me tally the totals in silence. "You're really going to do this?" he asked. His voice was gentle but steady. "Yes," I said. "No more sliding under their rules. No more paying for their control. No more pretending it's just family love." Clara tugged at the blanket. "Mom, are we going back?" Her voice was small, tentative. "Not yet, sweetie," I said. "First, we make sure it's safe to go back." The ledger became my manifesto. I noted every surprise charge, every potluck we funded, every birthday brunch, every emergency where we were expected to supply cash, time, or dignity. The numbers weren't just numbers anymore. They were the narrative of a life lived quietly under their thumb. By mid-afternoon, Edward and I had planned our approach. This wasn't about yelling, arguing, or revenge. It was about clarity, boundaries, and the principle that humiliation is never acceptable, no matter who wields the authority. That evening, I wrote my first family boundary email, leaving tone intentionally neutral, almost bureaucratic. "Dear Margaret, Carly, and Kayla, yesterday Clara was handed a dirty mop and shamed in front of family. That behavior is unacceptable. Going forward, we will not participate in events where Clara or I are disrespected. We will not fund family gatherings, phone plans, or surprise expenses. If we choose to give a gift, it is voluntary, not repayment for past services. All future requests for money will be declined." I read it to Edward. He nodded, impressed by the clarity and calm. "Perfect, yes," he said. "Short, factual, no emotion to twist against you." Clara peeked over my shoulder. "Mom, they're going to be mad, aren't they?" "Yes," I said softly, "but sometimes standing up for yourself makes people mad. That's okay. What matters is that we don't accept humiliation." That night, we built a small fortress of normalcy in our hotel room. Dinner together, a simple board game, Clara laughing as she explained the rules differently each turn. Edward poured cocoa into 2 chipped mugs. The warmth of routine, of simple acts performed on our own terms, was intoxicating. I reflected on the subtle ways my mother had conditioned me to endure. Every act of kindness or financial help was a test. Holidays were never for joy. They were carefully orchestrated exercises in guilt and obligation. Carly, my sister, floated above it all, rewarded for charm and compliance that didn't cost her anything. I had learned too late that being the responsible one, the invisible one, had not earned me respect, only exhaustion. By the time Clara was tucked in, I had completed a new ledger entry. Family Policy version 1.0. No one pays for access to love. No one accepts humiliation as currency. Boundaries enforced, not explained. Edward took my hand. "You're doing something brave," he whispered. I squeezed back, feeling the tension in my shoulders begin to release. "Brave or insane," I said. A small laugh escaped, but beneath it was steel. I knew the next step, the confrontation with my mother, would be tense. She thrived on manipulation and control, but for the first time, I didn't care. I was armed with clarity, numbers, and the quiet conviction that dignity was non-negotiable. As the city lights flickered against the hotel blinds, I realized that this Christmas was not about gifts, trees, or tradition. It was about defining who we are and what we refuse to tolerate. It was about showing Clara that boundaries matter, that self-respect matters. And it was about finally learning that a lifetime of silent compliance was not bravery, it was survival. By late morning, the frost had melted from the hotel parking lot, leaving the air crisp and clean. Clara skipped beside us as we approached Margaret's house, her small backpack bouncing with each step. She clutched her fox tightly, as if it could shield her from the storm we were walking into. Edward stayed close, hand brushing against mine, silent support in a house that had never offered comfort. The door opened before we could knock. Margaret's face froze, half surprise, half irritation. Carly hovered behind her, smirk already in place. "Well, look who decided to show," Margaret said, her voice coated with feigned warmth. "Left without finishing your dishes, I see. How considerate." I stepped forward, feeling the ledger weight in my bag, the quiet authority it represented. "Mom, I'd like to talk," I said, calm and deliberate. "About last night, about Clara." Carly rolled her eyes, crossing her arms. Kayla appeared in the doorway, curiosity written all over her face. I placed the ledger on the kitchen counter. The crisp sound of paper made the room settle, even if only for a second. "This is not about money, not about revenge. It's about clarity and boundaries," I said, voice steady. Yesterday, Clara was handed a dirty mop and shamed in front of everyone. That behavior is not acceptable, and it will not happen again. Margaret blinked, the smile faltering. "We all pitch in. That's how families work. You just don't like being called out." "Pitching in isn't the same as humiliation," I said, flipping to the first page. "We've paid for countless family events, surprise expenses, and phone plans. Over 3 years, we covered Thanksgiving turkey twice, full Easter brunch once, 10 potlucks that weren't potlucks, and the family phone plan plus add-ons for Carly and Kayla, totaling $4,982.17. A murmur ran through the room. Chairs creaked. Carly's smirk wavered. Margaret's jaw tightened. "I'm not here to argue," I continued. "I'm here to be clear. We will no longer fund these expenses. We will not accept disrespect toward Edward or Clara. Gifts are voluntary, not repayment. Requests for money will be declined. That's our boundary." Carly's voice broke the silence. "So, you're cutting us off?" "No," I said firmly. "I'm cutting off the pattern." Margaret's lips thinned. "Closure? After everything we've done for you? After raising you, feeding you, keeping a roof over your head?" "We were kids living under it," I said softly. "Now we are adults, and we are teaching our daughter that dignity is not for sale." Kayla scoffed. "You think you're better than us because you keep a ledger?" "I don't think I'm better than anyone," I said, locking eyes with her. "I think we deserve respect." The air in the room shifted. For once there was no applause, no audience reaction, just raw, uncomfortable clarity. Margaret stepped closer, fury in her eyes. "You won't last without us." "We'll be fine," I said quietly, closing the ledger. "This isn't revenge. This is closure, and we are choosing peace over humiliation." Edward put a hand on Clara's shoulder, steadying her. The little girl's fingers unclenched from her fox, and for the first time, she smiled in that room. Margaret's parting shot was sharp. "You're ungrateful, Lila. You and your little family eat for free and then judge." "We've paid in money and silence," I said, calm as I had ever been. "Both accounts are closed. We made our choice." I turned to Clara, lifted her coat, and Edward followed suit. No one spoke as we left the house. Outside, the air smelled clean, unclaimed. No bargains, no humiliations. Just a family who had learned, finally, that respect is non-negotiable. Back at our own home, the suitcase sat half unpacked on the rug, a silent testament to decisions made. Clara watched cartoons with a seriousness that made my heart ache, and Edward handed me a cup of cocoa. We were building a new routine, small and deliberate, free from invisible debts and orchestrated guilt. I checked my phone. 12 new texts in the family group thread, all complaints and demands, none about Clara. I didn't respond. I placed the phone face down and held Clara close, listening to the quiet hum of the radiator. For the first time, it felt like air could fill the room instead of weight. Later that evening, I drafted a final family policy email. Boundaries written in plain language, calm but unwavering. I read it aloud to Edward, who nodded, proud and reassured. I pressed send. Explosive messages poured in from Margaret and Carly, but I ignored them. This time, the rules weren't negotiable. We made grilled cheese, played a board game, and watched a silly movie. Clara laughed like her voice hadn't been measured and judged in years. The house felt breathable, free. That night, as I tucked Clara into bed and passed a cheap candle across the table with Edward, I realized this wasn't just about one Christmas. It was a lesson in dignity, resilience, and love that doesn't cost your soul. And as I finally closed my laptop, I knew exactly how I would respond the next time someone tried to hand my child a mop. The week after Christmas, our apartment felt larger, lighter. Clara bounced between rooms, inventing stories and games, while Edward and I moved through familiar routines with a new rhythm. Breakfast was longer, slower. Dishes weren't just washed, they were our own. Small things, the quiet click of a spoon against a plate, the scent of cocoa in the morning, became acts of reclamation. The family group thread erupted for days, messages flooding in from Margaret, Carly, even Kayla. Complaints, manipulations, accusations. I didn't respond. Edward didn't. Clara asked once, "Mom, are they mad at us?" "They are," I said softly, "but that's their choice. Our job is to be kind and safe, not to carry the weight of someone else's anger." By the third day, the frenzy slowed. There were fewer calls, fewer texts. The pattern had broken. The power of expectation, of unearned obligation, was gone. Clara noticed it too. "Mom," she said one afternoon, "I feel lighter." "Yes," I whispered, holding her close. "We've made room for ourselves." Edward and I began to explore small freedoms we had ignored for years. A $7 coffee date where no phones intruded. A long walk by the bay, hand in hand, where we could talk about dreams instead of obligations. Even fixing our leaking faucet became a quiet victory, proof that we didn't need approval to exist on our own terms. The family policy hung in our kitchen cabinet, taped next to the cereal, a daily reminder of our line in the sand. We do not pay for access to love. We do not accept humiliation as currency. We repeat the rule once and leave. Weeks passed. Clara's confidence grew. At her school's story time, she proudly placed her paper star on the poster, writing in bright letters, "I said no to a mean thing, and my parents backed me up." My throat tightened as I watched her, the small, victorious smile lighting her face. She understood, in ways I never fully did as a child, that boundaries were not walls, but shields. Margaret sent a small invitation 3 weeks later, a quiet dinner, immediate family only. I read it aloud to Edward. "We're not available," I said. "Happy to meet at a cafe for an hour next month." He nodded. That was enough. The ledger was closed, but the lessons remained. By February, even Carly seemed to grasp the shift, sending a final, reluctant text. "You went nuclear over a mop." I typed back honestly, "We went nuclear over respect." I didn't hate her, I simply didn't carry her anymore. One night, as Clara and I read a bedtime story, she looked up and asked, "Mom, can we keep our rules forever?" "Yes, darling," I said. "Our rules protect us. They make sure no one can take our dignity away." Edward passed me the cheap candle from the table, the warm glow soft on our faces. Outside, the world carried on, oblivious. Inside, our family had learned something essential. Love isn't a ledger, and respect is earned, not owed. I glanced at Clara, asleep with her fox tucked under her arm. At that moment, I felt a quiet triumph, not loud or boastful, but enduring. Boundaries had not just saved our dignity, they had saved our hearts. And I knew firmly that if anyone ever tried to hand my child a mop again, I would be ready, calm, clear, unyielding. This isn't revenge. This is closure. This is love.